So I've always been a fan of horror, and I think that Universal has this really unique opportunity with the characters and the properties that they have the rights to. So I wanted to make this video as a kind of history of the Dark Universe, both the official and unofficial entries, and look at where they went wrong along the way, and hopefully offer some inspiration for what they potentially could do in the future. But thank you to my Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible, and also thank you to Petal, because without support from sponsorships and Patreon, I wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So if you're a fan of this channel or of these videos, I'd really appreciate you checking out some of the links in the description. It really helps me out. And also, I mean, hey, like all the standard stuff, if you guys want to give a like or leave a comment or subscribe, that always helps too. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Franchises have been a part of the film industry for as long as they've been a reliable way of making successful films. We've seen franchises of action, comedy, fantasy, science fiction, even horror, but the nature of most movie franchises means a self-contained universe and set of characters that only exist within those movies. The idea of a shared cinematic universe with interconnected films among multiple franchises may be most well known these days through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it goes as far back as the 1930s with the original Universal monster lineup. Iconic horror classics like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Mummy, all of which saw multiple sequels, crossovers, and eventual remakes. And in 2014, with the release of Dracula Untold, Universal attempted to launch their own new shared cinematic universe called the Dark Universe, that would see many of Universal's most famous characters updated for a new generation. But critical and commercial disappointment led them to eschew Dracula Untold as the beginning of the franchise, setting out to try again with The Mummy, and when that also failed to deliver on the studio's expectations, they cancelled all future projects that had been in production, starting over again with The Invisible Man. And now their plans for the future seem to be modernizing each of their classic films with a different director executing their own vision, rather than each film working together and building off of each other like the Marvel films do. And while I may have enjoyed The Invisible Man quite a bit actually, I truly believe that we deserve a better vision for the Dark Universe. As someone who has a deep love for all things horror, there is nothing I'd rather see as a franchise. Frankly, I'm a little worried about Amazon's plans for Middle-earth, even though I love The Lord of the Rings. And as a Star Wars fan, Disney has already let me down, so I'm generally not in love with the notion of every beloved story or character being expanded into these ongoing franchises. But I love the Universal monsters, and most of them haven't been given their proper due in a long time. Not to mention that this last decade or so has arguably been the best for horror that we've ever seen, with modern horror masterpieces coming out virtually every year, and massively successful shows like Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, or American Horror Story helping the genre to rise in the ranks of popular culture. So now would be the perfect time to see some of these horror legends brought back to the big screen with a big budget, because there's never been a better time to find talented storytellers working in the genre and an audience to support it. But Dracula Untold and The Mummy essentially feel much more like straightforward action movies, poorly written ones at that, with one-dimensional action heroes and cliché villains, love interests and comic relief, and CGI-fueled action set pieces punctuating the expository dialogue, each clearly building towards the Dark Universe's version of the Avengers. But Bram Stoker's original novel is nothing like a Marvel comic. The MCU works because these images, these characters and stories naturally lend themselves to the summer blockbuster formula. But trying to transpose classic gothic horror literature into a genre that it doesn't belong was just destined to fail. And I feel the same is true for The Mummy and its original 1932 film counterpart. They lose so much of the original essence that it feels like a betrayal of the source material rather than the fresh new take that they were clearly hoping for. So they adapted to the criticism and completely reworked the foundation of the Dark Universe, replacing the original team behind the franchise's development, who had been known for movies like Star Trek, Transformers, and Fast and the Furious, with people like Lee Whannell and Jason Blum, who are known for their work on some of the most successful horror franchises in recent memory. And I think that if nothing else, this shows their desire to prioritize horror over action for the future films, but I don't think that the full potential of the Dark Universe can be realized by trying to emulate either end of that spectrum. If we go back to the 90s, there was another dark universe of sorts, not a proper cinematic universe all under the same studio and direction, but there were many films coming out in the 90s that were either remakes of classic Universal monster movies or adaptations of classic horror literature, with acclaimed directors like Francis Ford Coppola directing Dracula and serving as producer on Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein, as well as Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, all developing their own stylistic vision of mature films for mature audiences. Given the luxury of talented people both in front of and behind the camera with considerable budgets for R-rated films, and the freedom to develop these films separate from each other. These films are all far from perfect, but there's a reason many of them were Oscar nominees or winners for things like costume design or cinematography. They weren't treated like niche genre films. They were treated with the same level of craftsmanship as any other Oscar contender, and they offered a level of spectacle normally not seen within the horror genre. But despite some acclaim at the technical aspects, most of these films were critically panned, some more so than others, which seemed to directly influence Universal's direction when rebooting The Mummy in 1999. What started as a smaller budget horror film that at one point had Clive Barker attached, then George A. Romero, eventually through director Stephen Sommers, transformed into more of an action adventure inspired by Indiana Jones, meant to follow in the vein of the action comedies that had dominated the box office at the time. And despite mixed critical reviews, it went on to become one of the highest grossing films of the year, eventually earning 2 sequels and a spin-off franchise. Seeing the potential for the franchise to expand into other films with other characters, Universal brought Stephen Sommers back to develop Van Helsing, a reimagining of a character first introduced in Bram Stoker's original novel, coupled with some other elements and characters from Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And while it made a profit at the box office, given how expensive marketing for a film of this scale can get, it didn't make nearly the profit that they were hoping for as their next big summer blockbuster. And with the critical reviews almost unanimously negative, they decided to leave the franchise there, only returning with the third and final Mummy film under a different director, most commonly considered to be the worst of the trilogy, and several of the straight-to-DVD Scorpion King films. But despite shifting The Mummy from straightforward horror into an action comedy, they still seem to see the potential of what directors like Coppola and Burton had explored with the high-budget, R-rated horror films like Sleepy Hollow, and attempted to do the same in 2010 with The Wolfman, even bringing in the same screenwriter, production designer, art director, and composer to work on the film. But the film struggled throughout production. Mark Romanek, the original director, ended up leaving the project because, as he put it, when there's a certain amount of money involved, these things make studios and producers a little nervous. They don't necessarily understand it, or they feel that the balance will swing too far to something esoteric, and we could never come to an agreement on the right balance for that type of thing. Ultimately, it made more sense for them to find a director that was going to fulfill their idea of the film that they wanted, and we just sort of parted ways. They considered directors ranging from Brett Ratner to Frank Darabont before deciding to hire Joe Johnston, a renowned visual effects artist who worked on Star Wars and Indiana Jones before becoming a successful filmmaker in his own right with films like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Jumanji. And with rewrites from David Self, they began to rework the film into something to appeal to wider audiences. Considering the film's $150 million budget, they had concerns about how well the film could perform at the box office. But all of the mishmashing of creative influences with a project that was in turnaround for half a decade left the film feeling like a hollow attempt on every level. It didn't quite work as a horror movie, it didn't quite work as an action spectacle, and as a result, it became one of the biggest commercial flops of the year, with even the president of Universal at the time calling it one of the worst films we've ever made. But then Marvel came along. After the release of Iron Man, we started to see a clearer picture of their vision for the MCU, accomplishing something that every other studio thought was impossible, by building an interconnected franchise with infinite sequel potential that generates billions of dollars every year. It wasn't long before DC jumped on board with their own DCU, and now just about every beloved intellectual property is being exhumed to be developed into its own cinematic universe. It was an inevitability that Universal would try to do the same, and what better place to start than with the Universal monsters? Iconic characters that can function together or separately in escapist entertainment with mass appeal and a backlog of material to pull from for future films. It's as close as they can get to the expansive nature of the Marvel comics, but it feels like they've given up on the potential of high-budget horror and opted to go with the Disney method instead. But one of the downsides is that all too often, talented filmmakers sign on to direct a movie within a major franchise only to drop out because they're unable to follow their vision, as is what happened with Phil Lord and Chris Miller with Solo or Edgar Wright with Ant-Man. Directors like Darren Aronofsky or David Fincher have expressed interest in making a superhero film, but they know that that means operating within the often suffocating studio system, and that would mean compromising on any vision that they might have. But considering Universal's new plans for the Dark Universe, not necessarily interconnected films or sequels or trilogies, it means that they don't have to find filmmakers who will fit comfortably into a pre-established mold, or to sign the next 10 years of their life away building out this ever-growing franchise. They can find talented filmmakers with vision who want to do something bold with these stories. People like Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, David Robert Mitchell, or Jordan Peele have all shown a deep understanding of what makes something effective in horror, and I think that any one of those stories would do well in such capable hands. They could embody the best of all of the previous attempts, with the craftsmanship and the scope of the 90s Dark Universe, and the best of the modern cinematic techniques as seen in the recent attempts, with a true focus on the root of why we loved these stories in the first place, because of their ability to scare us. But right now, with directors like Elizabeth Banks or Dexter Fletcher attached, I worry that these films too will feel less like horror and more like action movies or dramas or, God forbid, comedies. We know how powerful a scary story can be in the right hands, and we know that some of these newer directors would love to work on a project like this. In fact, Robert Eggers has been working on a remake of Nosferatu, which itself was an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula. So I think Universal should embrace the unique opportunity that they've been presented with, by giving the most visionary directors a chance to do something special with these stories and these characters, and not by abandoning its genre roots, but by embracing them. It seems the main argument against making more of a traditional horror film on a higher budget is the inherent risk of a film with an R rating or something that's in more of a niche genre. But none of these proposed films would need the same sort of budget as the Avengers. Coppola's Dracula cost around $40 million to make, but it ended up making $215 million. Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow cost around $70 million, but it made $207 million. So it's clear that they can get the big budget treatment without going needlessly overboard and still have the potential to be profitable, even as a period film or a hard R-rated horror film. There just seems to be a crucial misunderstanding of the unique potential that the Dark Universe can offer. They just keep looking to other established franchises for guidance, first modeling everything after Marvel, and now after franchises like The Conjuring. But if these films aren't meant to be connected in the same way as a standard cinematic universe, but to be connected in spirit through a shared vision of mature retellings of classic horror stories, why not look to other classic horror films? There was a time when horror could be seen as just as respectable as any other genre, and boasts some of the most critically beloved films of all time. But we lost a lot of years to campy remakes or the heartless torture porn, and it's only been somewhat recently that horror has been on the rise again, and I would hate to see so much potential for a one-of-a-kind franchise to go to waste. I think a great example to point to for imagining what these films could be would be The Shape of Water. Admittedly, it is less straightforward horror than I would hope for in the other films, but it is Guillermo del Toro's reimagining of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and acts like an unofficial entry into the Dark Universe in much the same way as some of the films from the 90s. It's a gorgeously made, thought-provoking film that is as close to ideal as you can get for what a modern remake should be. And it seems that most others thought so too. Despite being a supposedly niche film, not only did it make a generous profit on its $20 million budget, it ended up receiving 13 Academy Award nominations, ultimately winning 4, including Best Director and Best Picture. If we were to think of The Shape of Water as the Dark Universe's version of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and imagine that same level of artistry and passion going into every other film, finding that middle ground where a film is given the budget it needs without having to become a global box office smash success just to recoup its investment. Intelligent films with high production values in a period setting based on iconic stories meant for mature audiences, with an underlying horror that has the power to affect people the way the original stories once did. That is what the Dark Universe should be. Not just another version of the MCU, and also not just another version of the Insidious franchise, but somewhere in the middle, borrowing the best ideas from otherwise flawed films and taking advantage of the fact that they hold the rights to some of the most legendary creations in all of cinema. I can't be the only one with superhero fatigue or who just hopes to see another sort of spectacle for a change. It feels like a rare treat when blockbuster entertainment takes a different approach, and it's even rarer to see that kind of big budget spectacle in the world of horror. But I refuse to believe that I'm the only one waiting and hoping to see that someday. I am by no means an expert in the world of finance, but the older you get, the more you appreciate how important something like credit can be. Building a healthy credit score can offer an important safety net in more ways than one, but it's not always easy to know where to start. The Pedal One card is designed to help you build your credit, with higher limits that can help give some much needed padding for credit utilization, variable APRs that range from 19.99% to 29.49%, and no annual fee. Pedal also has an intuitive mobile app that helps you track your spending, and it's a great place to start even if you've never had a credit score before. You can even see if you're pre-approved without having to worry that it's going to affect your credit score. Plus, Pedal One is issued by Pedal's partner, WebBank member FDIC. You can check out the offer for yourself by heading to pedalcard.com/filmradar. It's something that really helps me in making these videos and can help you in building your credit. Again, the link is petalcard.com/filmradar.